Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your daily sit rep for Monday, the 22nd of September, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. With that, Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway here. Lots to cover. Starting with President Trump here, talking about prosecutions. I know he had a weird kind of falling out with Attorney General Pam Bondi on Friday over the weekend, and then he came back and he quickly said, "Oh no, she's really doing a good job." Okay, what's the latest here, Robert?
Good morning, Mike. So, like you said, over the weekend, President Trump put out a social media post where he said that the Attorney General needs to move forward with investigations and prosecutions of Senator Adam Schiff, former FBI Director James Comey, and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Interestingly, he said that the lack of criminal charges against Schiff, Comey, and James is, quote, killing our reputation and credibility, which I think this is a signal that Trump is putting pressure on Bondi to start accelerating these investigations of potential charges. He did say to reporters after this on Saturday that this was not a criticism of Bondi, but one way or the other, we have to act fast. The Trump administration does, and according to President Trump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did notice a couple of important things. President Trump said something to the effect that he's seen a lot of the criticism, how they always promise action and then no one actually gets arrested, and there's no prosecutions. And so obviously he sounds somewhat sensitive to that. Also, over the weekend, FBI Director Kash Patel came out and he addressed a lot of the conspiracies at this point surrounding the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So it does seem like if these two are not terminally online, they have folks in their staff who are terminally online and really paying attention to probably what's in the conservative zeitgeist here about a lot of things. At any rate, on Sunday, on one of the Sunday morning talk shows, they talked about how a statute of limitations was up on some of these cases that Trump wants prosecuted, and how the case against Letitia James fell apart, apparently because there was not enough evidence to actually bring to a grand jury to have her indicted. And it just seems to me that if these are actual crimes, time does seem to be running out here for Pam Bondi.
Yeah, and I think that it is very accurate to say that there are people in the administration that are paying very heavy attention to, especially social media. And sometimes it seems like some of the Trump administration's policy responses are almost directly related to some of these things that happen, especially on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. That does seem to be the case. All right, thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on here. So this was interesting. This is another thing that was discussed on the Sunday news talk shows about how this crackdown over at the Pentagon, they're going to make reporters sign these pledges and force them to not release classified information. It also includes unclassified information. But having these journalists really tamp down and increase the operation security around the military and what's coming out of the Pentagon. What's the latest here?
So this was based on a memo from Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell. They basically, like you said, they're going to have journalists sign what's basically a secrecy agreement, and it's not going to just cover classified materials, classified national security information, but also what they call controlled unclassified information, and also require these journalists with the press credentials to report on the Pentagon to actually submit reporting to the Pentagon, as far as I understand, to get approval.
Mm-hmm. On Sunday, some of the commentators said, "Oh, this is what you would expect out of China or Russia."
Oh, I think Mike froze. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next item. So President Trump issued an executive action on Friday restricting the use of H-1B visa, special occupation foreign worker visas, unless companies petitioning for these visas include a $100,000 payment per application. And according to the White House release, the restriction in the $100,000 payment will not be required for H-1B visas that are in the U.S. national interest, but this is at the discretion of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Moving over to the domestic side, the Utah Legislative Redistricting Committee is scheduled to hold 2 public meetings this week, and they are expected to publish a new proposed mid-decade congressional map on Thursday, the 25th of September. Also, over the weekend, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced that it's going to cancel its annual household food security report moving forward, and the last one will be 2024. And according to the USDA announcement, the annual food insecurity survey became redundant and politicized. And according to their announcement, the prevalence of food insecurity remained unchanged for the last 30 years, despite an 87% increase in SNAP spending between 2019 and 2023. And the Environmental Protection Agency ordered EPA Office of Water staff to pause all research on water issues. And 2 EPA employees were at the meeting where this was announced. They were told all EPA water research will undergo a new review process, but the details on that new review process were not made clear to employees. I think both of these are important because this is potentially going to curtail some of the data available on water and food security issues in the United States going forward, making it probably more difficult to discern if there are any changes in food availability in U.S. households or water both water availability and water contamination. And then Jared, if you could come on and take us through the global roll-up. Oh, Mike's back.
Hey, sorry, guys. I don't know why I dropped, but maybe I got it fixed. But listen, I just briefly, as I was saying, the Sunday news talk shows were saying this pledge from journalists not to release sensitive but unclassified information or unclassified. It's called FOUO, well, in many cases, for official use only, and it is supposed to be controlled within the military community or within those military channels. However, this information was distributed. And then of course, you have secret and top secret and above top secret stuff. And they were talking about how this is authoritarian. They do not want these journalists talking about these sensitive military plans that the Pentagon is drawing up under President Trump. This is basic OPSEC. This is basic operation security stuff. They are talking about having an armed conflict with China, or maybe Russia spills over, or there's maybe a handful of other things. And, at a certain point, if you're the administration, you do have to balance, quote unquote, freedom of the press versus protecting sensitive details and not tipping our hand to adversaries. But I'll tell you, Robert, this is just another area for me. If we do get into an armed conflict, let's say with China in the next couple of years, the Davidson windows in 2027, will she, won't she? I don't know. Talking about Chinese President Xi Jinping. But it sure seems like this is going to be potentially a massively contentious issue, as you're going to have journalists in this country potentially actively working against the administration, publishing military details that probably should not be published in a time of war. And I would not be surprised to see a major clampdown here. And that's just going to reinforce the narrative of fascism. But the Trump administration, in some ways, if we actually do go to war, and I know, quote unquote, no new wars, is potentially going to be in a lose-lose situation here. On the one hand, you cannot have journalists publishing classified information about a war effort. On the other hand, you are not supposed to curb the First Amendment freedoms of the press in this country. Do you have any observations on that?
I forget I forget the guy's name. There was a tech guy a couple of months ago that did a podcast where he was talking about how Democrats and Republicans view America. And one of the points he made was actually that the Democratic Party and I think the larger Democratic political coalition and movement was kind of aligning with China that they view America, the state, as more important than America, the nation. I think that stuck out to me because in that exact case where we are in a conflict with China, these Democrat-aligned institutions and possibly even lawmakers would, I think, inadvertently or unwittingly, basically provide information that China would be able to access on U.S. strategy or troop movements or things like that would be coming out of the Pentagon. And I think this is potentially a preemptive move by the Trump administration to curtail that, with the expectation that we are going to end up in a crisis or conflict with China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a fine line between cheerleading war and saying, well, I mean, if we're in a war, then in it potentially just war in our national interest, we've got to win it. All right, thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to the rest of our the global sit rep. Jared, good morning. More airspace violations over the weekend. This time in Estonia.
Yes. So this time, 3 Russian fighter jets flew over Estonian airspace for 12 minutes before, and NATO F-35s ended up repelling them by the end of that. Estonia has already invoked NATO Article 4, and there will be a discussion on that in the NATO Council tomorrow. This is obviously mirroring the one that just happened in Poland a week and a half ago. So I'll continue to report on that. We'll probably see an expansion of Eastern Sentry, the operation in response to Poland's. Now, moving much closer to home, Venezuela is beginning a military operation, not an exercise, but an actual operation near Trinidad and Tobago. Just a quick reminder, Trinidad and Tobago did already come out and say, U.S., you can use our entire landmass to conduct operations in Venezuela if you need it. They're the green space right next to Venezuela here on the map. And the location for Venezuela's operation is the brighter red next to it. The Venezuela's defense minister announced this operation and said that this is intended to occupy, secure, and control the territory of the state of Sucre, and is primarily to counter what they're saying is human arms and drug trafficking coming from Trinidad and Tobago.
Human trafficking and drug trafficking into Venezuela from Trinidad and Tobago. Sounds like they're trying to stop some unconventional warfare plan, and that is basically your boat landing zone or landing zone for getting people into Venezuela to conduct unconventional warfare. I'm not saying that's the case, but ostensibly, sure, they're trying to stop drug trafficking into Venezuela. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. This is very concerning because they're extremely close. At just mainland to mainland, they're less than 10 miles away. At their closest territorial point, they're less than a mile away. So you could actually conduct some very quick landing operations between each other. And that part of Venezuela is very sparse for population. Mm-hmm. Moving over to the Middle East, there's a couple of big things coming out of there. Is the Israeli prime minister reportedly asked the Trump administration over the weekend to pressure Egypt into scaling down the Egyptian military buildup on the Egypt-Israeli border. We've been covering that. They've been adding troops here and there. There is some additional military infrastructure going up on the Egyptian side that Israel's concerned violates the 1979 peace treaty and could potentially be used offensively. Egypt's State Information Service claims that all of these are only for defensive use, and it's primarily to address terrorism and smuggling, which that has been a problem that both Egypt and Israel have acknowledged across that border during this war here. And then lastly, some decadal news, really. Egypt and Turkey are renewing maritime exercises in the Eastern Mediterranean for the first time in 13 years. Now, it's kicked off today. It'll go through until the 26th of September. And I haven't been able to find Egypt's naval forces composition. Just nobody's published that, not even the Egyptian ministry. But Turkey did say they're going to deploy 2 frigates, 2 fast attack craft, a submarine, and 2 F-16s for the Eastern Med. That's a pretty significant force. When you add on to Egypt's, this is going to be a sizable force, and frankly, the territory is going to be near Israeli waters. There's just no way to avoid that due to their central location in the Eastern Med.
Mm. And then this is part of this. They've been talking about this Arab equivalent of an Arab NATO potentially going to war, trying to intervene in Gaza against the Israelis. This military exercise in the Eastern Mediterranean, it's pretty obviously geared towards Israel.
I think so. Turkey is not part of the Arab League, so they wouldn't be part of Arab NATO, but they were at the summit. They condemned everything that everybody else condemned, and they've been having issues with Israel. Israel's gotten very close to accidentally assassinating Turkish officials in Damascus, Syria, because Turkey's helping rebuild Syria. I think this is primarily going to be a show of force along with developing interoperability again.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that update, Jared. And with that, that's going to do it for, let's see, we got 47 protests today, and that's going to do it for our daily sit rep. I appreciate you watching. We're going to jump over to the high side here for our members only briefing for early warning members. Head over to forwardobserver.com/trial. Start your free 7-day trial. Got the Homeland Operations sit rep coming up from Robert. We're going to talk about what federal law enforcement is doing, the kind of the latest in their operations and these surges across a handful of cities across the United States. A lot more is to come. We'll talk about this shutdown that appears to be unresolved at this point. I think they've got until the 30th to figure this out before partial government shutdown. And then we'll talk about some updates on Japan. With that, everyone, thanks for watching. And Jared, if you could please take us over, and early warning folks, stand by.